Today's presentation is about postal stationery. Ženkliniai leidiniai lietuviškai. This is outline of my talk. I will start with the introduction to postal stationery as defined by FIP and APS. I will cover terms used and classification with some hints how to collect postal stationery and what to collect. The second half of my talk will focus on postal stationery in the territory of Lithuania. What is not covered today are formula postal cards, and there won't be any in-depth review of Lithuanian government-issued postal stationery cards. These two topics deserve their separate presentations. Why collect postal stationery? For those who wish to extend their philatelic and historical knowledge, postal stationery offers an excellent opportunity. Postal stationery is perfectly suited in the study of postal systems and how they operate. Moreover, postal cards are fine historical documents like this 35-cent reply card mailed from Vilkaviškis internal camp to Chicago in 1939. What we see here in this fine example, the card was sent by Viktor Hermanovsky, who was publisher and editor of the philatelic periodical Ikaros in Bialystok between 26 and 39, who was mobilized on the first day of the Second World War on September 1st, and after the September campaign interned in Lithuania, and then later in Russia. Later in 42, he joined the Anders Army Corps and walked the entire combat route in the Middle East and Italy. And from 1945, he lived in exile in Chicago. What is postal stationery in general? First thing I would like to draw your attention to various definitions found out there on the marketplace in the auctions describing postal cards. Postal card is a card issued by the relevant postal authority, while the postcard, on the other hand, is typically printed and sold by private companies. These two terms are often mixed up. So talking about postal stationery, we would be addressing as well as postal cards. One can look at postal stationery in very, very broad definition. Basically anything that was issued by the postal authority can be considered as postal stationery. However, both APS and FIP typically deals with much more narrow definition, specifically addressing postal cards with imprinted or embossed stamps. The term used in Lithuanian Philatelic, Ženklinis leidinys, already complies with this narrow, more restrictive description. So the imprinted stamps. So here is an example of postal card, postal stationery card with imprinted 35-cent stamp. During 1924 and 1940, Lithuanian Post issued a number of postal stationery cards. And here are the imprinted stamps summarized in one slide. Those imprinted stamps were typically 15 cents for domestic use or 36 cents later to change to 35 cents for international use. So from all the postal stationery card series, we only have 4 postal cards issued for international use. The rest were for domestic. I will have an opportunity to give a more dedicated topic on classic Lithuanian postal stationery issued between 1924 and 1940. Today, this introductory talk will only briefly mention and only briefly shows some examples of classic Lithuanian postal stationery. So again, postal stationery is a postal matter which has either officially authorized pre-printed stamp or, in addition, an inscription or device indicating an implied monetary value. And the value is indicated on the item, like a postcard shown here in the left-hand corner, or postal stationery envelope, or letter sheet, or other items, and they retain its value until canceled or when used, or otherwise demonetized by the postal authorities. In addition to classical postal cards, postal envelopes, and letter sheets, we have two other examples here. International reply coupon and airgram that at the first glance do not have an imprinted stamp. However, if you look carefully at the coupon, you will see an inscription of 1 litas indicating an implied monetary value, as well as the aerogram example here has an imprinted description implying that monetary value has been paid at the time of the sale. I would like to draw your attention to a couple of postal stationery terms, especially for those who aren't English speaking collectors, especially those collectors from Lithuania. Here we have a summary. So the postal card, postal stationery card in Lithuanian will be ženklinis atvirukas, postal stationery envelope or stamped envelope, sometimes called, is ženklinis vokas, letter sheet, ženklinis lakštas, slapukas, international reply coupon, tarptautinis atsiskaitimo kuponas, air letter sheet or aerogram, we call it aerogramma. So these are products that were issued by the Lithuanian Post. Other countries also issue newspaper wrappers, we refer to as banderolė, registration envelopes, ženklinis registruotas vokas, letter cards, ženklinis lakštinis atvirukas, and so on and so on. The earliest item of postal stationery in the world were letter sheets and envelopes, actually predating postage stamps. Already in the 1609 through 1796 in the Republic of Venice, letter sheets were mandatory for postal usage. As you can see here, a letter sheet and an inscription and indicia printed on the letter sheet indicating that 4 solidi tax to the magistrate or waters were collected at that time. Few other examples, 1653 in Paris, so-called de Villers penny post. There are no, fortunately, surviving examples. However, they were looked for. They were used for collection boxes, letters to be posted, wrapped with a slip paper indicating postage paid. In Britain, between 1712 and 1870, newspaper tax stamps were used. And here on the right-hand side is a print from the engraved copper plates, indicated the complexity of that stamp used for newspaper tax purposes. 1879 to 1836, Kingdom of Sardinia, so-called the Cavallini letter sheets are also known examples, which pay taxes on letters carried outside the mail. We classify postal stationery by its physical form. We can classify and we can collect and we can exhibit by its physical form. Physical form can be postal cards and reply cards, envelopes, registered envelopes, letter sheets and airgrams, letter cards, wrappers, and so on and so on and so on. Lithuanian Post, as I mentioned before, issued postal cards, postal envelopes, letter sheets, airgrams, and international reply coupons that I showed before. In addition to physical form, postal stationery can be classified by its function. You can classify and also collect and exhibit by this function. So first category is postal function, surface mail for local, inland, or foreign destinations. Air mail for inland and foreign destinations. Registered mail for inland and foreign destinations. In Memel, we find postal stationery for mail orders, and in some other countries, except Lithuania, telegraph forms were printed for both inland and foreign usage, as well as parcel cards and so on. Here is a very specific example of the postal function for the surface postal function used specifically traveling post offices in Lithuania. On the left-hand side, we have 15-cent postal stationery card mailed from Dotnuva to Görlitz, canceled by TPO postmark Biržai Šiauliai number 12, paid that time at the inland rate. On the right-hand side, there is another example of the postal stationery card mailed from Kaunas to Kaunas, canceled by TPO postmark Kaunas Alytus number 13. Few examples for airmail function. On the left-hand side, we have postal stationery card mailed from Kaunas to Berlin, which was uprated for airmail service. That time, extra 60-cent surcharge was required. On the right-hand side is a later example of 35-cent postal stationery card mailed from Sydney to forwarded to London, which was uprated to airmail service for international airmail rate, 35 cents plus 2.8 liters. From July 31st, 1936, surcharge for the airmail service dependent on the destination, on the country, on the distance. Another example of registered postal cards. These are quite difficult to find. Both examples are from the internet. On the left-hand side, we have registered postal stationery card mailed from Telšiai to Paris, franked with 36 plus 60 cents for both international destination and the registration. On the right-hand side, we have another registered card, 15 cents card, mailed from Alytus to Brussels at the foreign registered card rate, 35 plus 60 cents. And that took place after the tariff change in 1934. In addition to physical form, function, postal stationery can be classified by its availability. First category will be postal stationery issued and sold for generic public use. As we have seen the previous example, in some countries, but not in Lithuania, where there are postal stationery cards issued for military purposes, for members of the armed forces, postal stationery cards issued for the official services, for the government use, for local post use, sold by the private companies, as well as printed and stamped to order postal stationery cards and envelopes that were ordered by various organizations. And we have a few examples in Memel in 1939. Some of the propaganda postcards were issued, printed to order in 1939 in Memel. Other interesting users of postal stationery cards. Here on the left-hand side, we know that at that time, Lithuanian Red Cross used its own printed non-postal stationery cards. They used for correspondence of displaced civil and military personnel. At some point, Lithuanian Post started using postal stationery cards, as is shown here in this example on the right. Is a 15-cent postal stationery card mailed from the internment camp in Vilkaviškis to Belarus with the help of a Lithuanian cross as indicated in red cachet of the Lithuanian Red Cross. The interesting thing is the Kaunas postmark on the June 14, 1940, just one day before Lithuanian government was extorted to agree to the Soviet ultimatum to permit an entry on a limited number of the Soviet troops in Lithuania. Yes, you can see many other examples of this use in Vygintas Bubnys exhibit in Lituanica 2018. He shows several more interesting examples of postal stationery cards used for this purpose. Here I would like to summarize some useful information and the links where you can get some additional information on postal stationery. So first is the FIP Commission on Postal Stationery. We have some information in APS Judging Manual. We have United States Postal Stationery Society at uspss.org. Most of Lithuanian postal stationery is listed and classified very well in specialized 1918-2012 catalog by Antanas Jankauskas, as well as you can find postal stationery information in the Mikkel catalog of East Europe. There are several good examples of exhibits that use postal stationery cards and envelopes to illustrate their stories. One example is Imperial Russia exhibit by Liudas Mažylis, exhibited at Litpex 2022, as well as Vygintas Bubnys exhibit, exhibited at Lituanica 2018, as well as you can find very many postal stationery exhibit at Exponet on the internet. Let's talk about postal stationery in the territory of Lithuania. And after partitions of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, starting in 1772, later in 1793, and finally in 1795, administrative borders of Lithuania changed significantly. One could focus on collecting classic Lithuanian postal stationery limited to the modern day administrative borders and time period between 1924 and 1940, or perhaps expand a bit to include early periods and historically known Lithuanian cities. This exhibit will focus on postal stationery that was used in the territory of Lithuania from the Imperial Russia to the beginning of World War II. Here are the all historical periods for this time period. Imperial Russia period from 1843 to 1915. World War I, Audrius postal stationery from January 1916 to December 1918. As I mentioned before, the Lithuanian government issues postal stationery from 1924 to February 15, 1941. We have some examples of Soviet postal stationery in Vilnius and in the Lithuania in the 40s and 41s. We have interesting examples of German Reich postal stationery during Second World War. There are many examples of Soviet postal stationery between Second World War and 1990. And of course, many interesting examples issued by the Lithuanian Post after 1990. Looking at the Memel-Klaipėda region, one could study and collect postal cards during the Kingdom of Prussia period, those that were available during German Empire period from 1871 to 1920, postal cards during the French administration of Memel between February and 1920 and February 1923, as well as German Reich postal cards from March 1939 to end of Second World War, as well as postal stationery cards in Vilnius region, especially those related to Central Lithuania, until March of 22, postal stationery until 1939, as well as postal stationery in Vilnius, as I mentioned before, in 1939. Here are some few examples from my collection from the Imperial Russian period. There is a fine example of the letter sheet mailed from Tauragė to Petersburg in 1854. As you can see here on the left-hand side, we have an embossed indicia indicating 1 kopek value of the letter sheet to be paid to the postal authorities for mailing this particular item to a destination. Two more examples. On the left-hand side, we have postal stationery envelope from Skuodas to Riga, mailed in 1883. And here you can see embossed 7 kopek stamp of the Russian Empire, as well as a postal stationery card here on the right, mailed from Vilnius to Utena in 1908. Again, imprinted 3 kopek stamp on the postal stationery card of Russian Empire. And as I mentioned before, please visit fine exhibit on postal postmarks of Vilenska gubernia since 1860s by Liudas Mažylis at Lifpex 2022 to see many, many more and very nice examples of postal stationery of that particular period. During the First World War, the postal area of the civil administration, Supreme Commander East, Oberost, was created and used their own stamps and postal stationery starting from January 15, 1916. For these purposes, Germany, a type of postal stationery cards of 5, 7.5, and 10 pfennigs were overprinted with Postgebiet ob Ost and used both on single and reply cards. So here are the few examples of unused cards: single card, 5 pfennig single card on the left, and a reply postal stationery card on the right. And here are a few examples of genuine usage of postal stationery card during that period from Lithuania. First one on the left, 5 pfennig postal stationery card mailed from Vilnius to Warsaw on 1916, paid local rate in Vilnius. However, in Warsaw, in Poland, additional surcharge was added of 6 groszy for municipal post office service at that time. And as you can see here, chief censorship mark from Königsberg is also found. Here on the right-hand side is a reply card mailed from Vilnius in 1916 at the local rate of 5 pfennig, military censorship mark, as well as is shown. Here is an example of 7.5 pfennig single and reply card, and postally used cards mailed from Lithuania. First one is mailed from Kaunas to Vabalnikai in 1918 at the local rate at that time, 7.5 pfennig, with censor cash it in Kaunas. And another example of single postal stationery card from Raseiniai to Königsberg in 1918, again at the local rate. This time we have Chief Censorship Office cash it in Königsberg. Here are the 2 examples of the single 10 pfennig and reply cards. These were printed for international use. However, during the initial period of Oberst, international postal cards were initially not allowed to foreign destinations. Later in 1917, only Bosnia-Herzegovina and the Russian from December of 1907 were allowed. Unfortunately, I don't have any example of postally used cards from that period, either to Russia or Bosnia-Herzegovina. If anyone has it, please share with us. It would be very interesting to see some practical examples. Here are a few examples of postal stationery envelopes I found in my collection. These are 3 pfennig, 5 pfennig, 10 pfennig, 20 pfennig, and 40 pfennig postal stationery envelope. Most of them are philatelic, if not all are philatelic. Some of them were favor canceled in Vilnius post office. 2 of these registered and 5-cent postal stationery envelope may have seen genuine postal usage, as can be seen from chief censorship cash it in Königsberg, as well as this registered cover mailed to Stuttgart, which has a receiving postmark on the back, as well as the MPK cash it of the military censorship. Local rates at that time were 5 pfennig for the local letter, 10 pfennig for inland letter, 20 pfennig for heavy inland letter, and registered local letters were at 25 cents. And I mentioned before, international destinations were not allowed initially. Postal stationery in Memel region, Klaipėdos kraštas. The study would include period of Kingdom of Russia until 1871, German Empire period from 1871 to 1920, period of the French administration from February 1920 to February 1923, Lithuanian government administration from 1923 to 1939, and the German Reich from 1939 to 1945. couple of examples from my own collection. Here on the left is a postal stationery card mailed in 1886 from Memel to Königsberg at the postcard rate of 5 pfennig. Here on the right-hand side, we have postal stationery envelope mailed in 1881 from Heidekrug, Skellefteå to Memel Klaipėda at the then letter rate of 10 pfennig. Sorry for the typo here. During the French administration, two French Sauer postal stationery cards were overprinted with Memel 30 pfennig and Memel 40 pfennig, as it's shown here. In addition to overprint, postcard had overprint postkarte-atvirutė. And this kind of obscured République Française. And these were used in early 1920s to 1923. And here are a few examples I found on the internet. One is double overprinted 10 centime French silver card, which was obviously overprinted with Memel 30 pfennig. Double overprinted, as you can see here, mailed from Ropcoin to Gaidalen in 22, which was just recently sold at Kohler auction for about 1,500 euros. Here is another example of the 20 centimes French overprinted postal stationery card of 40 pfennig, mailed from Memel to Zagreb, Yugoslavia, via Kaunas. As you can see, this Kaunas Paštas postmark of 1921. Later in the summer of 1922, Germania type German postal stationery cards of 30 cents and 40 cents were overprinted for use in territory, or in Memel territory, overprint Memel Gebiet. The usage was from August 1st to the end of October, when all overprinted Germania stamps were removed from circulation. These cards only could be used in the Memel territory and or sent to Germany. Here is one example I have in my collection of overprinted 30 pfennig Germania type of postal stationery card used in the Memel territory in 1920s, specifically mailed from Rusne in 1920, from Rusne to Berlin, which also has a military censorship mark. Unfortunately, I don't have any examples of overprinted 40 pfennig German postal stationery cards mailed in Memel territory at the time. If anyone has a good example, would you please share it or send it to me, and I will update this presentation for future use. Here's an example of Lithuanian government issued postal stationery card used in Memel territory in Klaipėdos krašte in 1923. On the left-hand side, although it's not strictly postal stationery, it is a postal card issued by Lithuanian Post, formula postal card, mailed from Juodkrantė to Klaipėda in 1924, franked with the 15 cents of the 5th Klaipėda issue. This example is from Vygintas Bubnys collection. Here on the right-hand side is a postal stationery card of 15 cent, mailed from Klaipėda to Gerdauen at the 15 Lithuanian cent rate at that time. And as I mentioned before, I will talk about classic Lithuanian postal stationery cards in some other presentation. After March of 1939, in the Memel territory, in the Memel region, one can find postal stationery cards of German Reich, as it is shown here in these two examples. On the left-hand side, we have German postal stationery card, 5 Pfennig postal stationery card mailed from Schlüte to Berlin, cancelled by Lithuanian postmark Schlüte with some rectangular Heidekrug cachet added, as well as Das Memel is frei, indicating celebration of Memel territory joining German Reich again. Here on the right-hand side, we have 6 Pfennig German postal stationery card mailed from Gaidale to Passau in March of 39, still cancelled with Lithuanian Gaidale postmark. There are many more examples of postal stationery cards of this period. Absolute majority of them are of philatelic production, philatelic nature. Central Lithuania period. In Republic of Central Lithuania, Litva Strotkova existed for about 18 months without any international recognition, except obviously Poland has recognized it. It was proclaimed on October 12, 1920, and finally incorporated into Poland on April 18th of 1922. The territory is indicated here in green, and the postal stationery of Central Lithuania were using German formula cards type C154, those printed in 1916, overprinting them with Litva Strotkova on the left, price, cena, 2 marks, and coat of arms of Central Lithuania. We have a Polish eagle and Lithuanian knight. So these were the German formula cards. Pochlocki reports 2 other type of postal stationery cards from this period. One of them is overprinted Russian postal stationery card from 1917, as well as overprinted German formula car type F36. Unfortunately, I don't have any examples in my collection. If anyone has it, please send me your scans. I will include it in the presentation for future use. There is one example in my collection on the left-hand side. You can see here it is a surcharged postal stationery card of Central Lithuania, printed on the German formula card 154, mailed from Vilnius to Lviv, to Western Ukraine. That part, Western Ukraine, was a part of Poland at the foreign card rate of 4 marks. So the 2 marks, the postal stationery itself, as well as 2 marks in additional postage. Here's on the right-hand side, we have another example I took from internet, from some previous auction sales. Postal stationery card mailed from Vilnius to Krakow in April of 21. Again, at the foreign postcard rate of 4 marks. So basically we have a 2 marks, we have a 2 mark surcharged postmark. So it's overpaid service. I think this is probably philatelic creation at the time. As you can see, it's probably it looks like very much the same handwriting. And most of the cards that I have seen during this period were sent by the same person to various destinations in Poland, most likely. And hopefully there are some other destinations. If anyone has some nice examples, would you please let me have a copy? What is interesting is that the German Formula car had this postcarded text clearly scratched off, bleached, or removed by some chemical or mechanical means. I think it's kind of, and you can kind of see traces of that. You don't really see much because it is kind of covered by overprint itself and the postage stamps. But on some other cars that I've seen, it's clearly been altered. That's kind of interesting observation. And finally, after the Vilnius region was incorporated in Poland, we see very many examples you can find everywhere of Polish postal stationery cards mailed from that region to various destinations. Here is one example of Polish postal stationery card, surcharge postal stationery card mailed from Grodno, from Galpinas to Vienna in 1928 at the foreign card rate. There is another example of postal stationery card mailed from Vilnius to Lviv in Western Ukraine, again, that part of Poland. And again, so one could easily collect a Polish post-issues postal stationery card from various Lithuanian towns. On September 1st, 1939, Hitler invaded Poland from the west. On September 17, Soviet troops invaded Poland and the Vilnius region from the east. During this period of time between September 17 and October 30th of 1939, Soviet postal stationery cards can be found mailed from Lithuania. On the left-hand side, there's one example of Soviet postal stationery card, 20 kopeek postal stationery card, surcharged with Polish 5 groszy stamp, favor cancelled at the Vilno 1 post office. Here on the right-hand side, we have fine genuine postal usage of the Soviet postal stationery card of 10 kopecks, surcharged with 5 kopeck Soviet stamp according to Polish tariff, mailed locally in Vilnius. This is the end of my presentation for today. Initially, we discussed about postal stationery in general terms, definition, examples, focusing on Lithuanian postal stationery products, discuss classification by function, by physical form, by availability, and also I give you some examples and indication about how to collect and exhibit postal stationery in general. And then later I showed you some examples, mostly from my collection, however illustrated with some other fine examples that I found on the internet or borrowed from some recent philatelic exhibits that covered Imperial Russia period, World War I Oberst period, those from Memel and Klaipėdos kraštas, few examples from the German Empire, French and Lithuanian administration, and German Reich. Also showed some examples of Central Lithuania postal stationery cards that were produced in Central Lithuania, and later Polish postal stationery card mailed from that period, as well as Soviet postal stationery cards mailed from this. One could easily add later Soviet postal stationery cards mailed from Lithuania in 1940. We could add Second World War, German occupation, and German Reich postal stationery cards mailed from Lithuania and obviously post-war period, the Soviet occupation until 1919, and modern-day Lithuania. These are separate topics. They are related, but separate topics, and hopefully we'll have more opportunities to discuss with postal stationery. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready to answer any questions you may have.